What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Christian Hannah Horror here, and today we're going to talk about what I consider to be one of the greatest slasher movies of all time, Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. The Final Chapter is directed by Joseph Zito, produced by the great Frank Mancuso Jr., and stars Corey Feldman, Ted White, Kimberly Beck, and Crispin Glover. When Friday the 13th Part 3 was released, Paramount had every intention to end the series there as a trilogy. It was completely evident that Paramount was totally embarrassed about the success of Friday the 13th, when every critic on the planet panned every single film that came out. But when all that money came in from the success of the 3D Friday the 13th Part 3, it was hard for Paramount not to follow it up. When discussions of Part 4 started, the first thing that was mentioned by most producers were, this is gonna be the final movie we do for this series. One rumor that swirled around, though, was not that Paramount was necessarily embarrassed by Friday the 13th, but that the slasher genre in itself was becoming a little bit stale. Two main players that made notion of this were Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel, stating that the slasher movies are starting to come to their end. And while slasher movies were continued to be made during the entirety of the 1980s, it is arguable that the first 3 years were arguably some of the best. Paramount Pictures sought out director Joseph Zito, which an executive saw a movie he did called The Prowler and thought it was pretty good. When they wanted him to write and direct, Zito mentioned that he wasn't much of a writer, but when they offered him double pay for doing both jobs, he took it. What Zito did, though, that Paramount didn't know about was that he was going to pay Barney Cohen under the table to write this movie for him. When all was said and done, Barney did get credit for writing Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, but they did have some issues with the Writers Guild for this. I will not go over the plot of Friday the 13th Part 4 with y'all because 99.9% of the people have already seen this movie. I want to talk to you guys about this movie and what I think about it. One of the biggest and surprising changes that the Friday the 13th Part 4 movie did was having a young adolescent kid being the main protagonist, whereas the first three had mostly young women. This film has been known by fans for infamously having a rough production on set with numerous problems. Director Joseph Zito has been under fire for years and even got worse after the big book Crystal Lake Memories came out, where they dive into every instance of every film. There were many, but one of the biggest and most infamous was the girl in the water incident. There was a scene where Jason was going to pop out the lake and take out a girl who was laying on a raft in the water. When Kimberly Beck was in the water, she had to be under there for an excruciatingly long period of time. This movie was filmed in the dead of winter. When stuntman and Jason actor Ted White said, "If you don't get this girl out the set, I'm walking," Zito felt the pressure and got the girl out of the water. While I don't condone anything Zito did with this instance, it is notable to say that he was under more pressure than arguably the rest of the cast because he had to get this film done in an incredibly short amount of time. The legacy of Friday the 13th Part 4 is arguably that of the best of the series. While the series continued on, most fans will tell you that Friday the 13th Part 4 is the culmination of Jason Voorhees. Another great instance is that Tom Savini himself came back onto the set to help with the scene of killing Jason himself, who we all know is the real creator of Jason. When it comes to a review of Friday the 13th Part 4, there's not a lot I have to say that really hasn't been said by a lot of fans and can be said better than I can ever say. Friday the 13th Part 4 is arguably one of the best slasher movies ever made, much less being one of the best Friday the 13th movies ever made. I always have trouble putting into words why I think a movie is so good, particularly slasher movies. It's just scene to scene one of the best slasher movies out there. I give a lot of credit to Ted White. There's a visceral personification that I think Ted White gave that role that was not seen before or since. While many fans like to consider Kane Hodder the true Jason, and I'm not really going to argue that, when it comes to who did it the best, I gotta give it to Ted. It's also known that Ted wasn't exactly proud or really happy to be doing this movie. I think all that angst and frustration came out on screen. One of the greatest scenes is when he busts the door down in front of Corey Feldman's character in the movie and grabs the kid. Ted White has been on record saying he was not a big fan of Corey Feldman and took a lot of pleasure in grabbing that kid in that scene. Despite this film having so much bad production and a lot of infights and situations, it all came together and the hard work paid off in what I consider to be one of the greatest slasher movies ever made. Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, has had a legacy that has not died for over 30 years, and I doubt it's going anywhere soon. While the Friday the 13th franchise as a whole has a legacy that can never be stopped, much like the character of Jason, The Final Chapter is that banner that I wave high, high, high in the air when I want somebody to come and enjoy a Jason movie with me. We'll talk about other Jason movies in the Friday the 13th franchise, particularly ones that I like that are kind of underrated in my opinion. But I do want to give credit to what I consider to be the best in the series, the final chapter. Thank you guys for watching this video. Maybe you learned something else about the movie that you haven't already, but most Friday the 13th fans should know everything about the movie already. I would love to know what you guys consider to be the best in the franchise. Obviously, you know now mine is the final chapter. Please leave a comment below, give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy these kinds of videos, and we'll see you guys next time.